back, everyone. I'm Steve Eisenhower. This is the Exodus Project. I'm joined with my good friend, Rabbi Stuart Federow.
How you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Thank God.
But first things first, before we get into our topic here today, everyone, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give the Rabbi and I a big thumbs up. So today we have a little, I guess, paradoxical
Wait,
topic.
there are two doctors? A paradox?
Paradoctor topic here.
Yeah.
Now this might sound a little, what's the word, maybe divisive, but the initial paradox question here is, can God commit suicide? It sounds silly to think about it, but I mean, really, if you're viewing the Christian Bible from the, whether it be Trinitarian or modalist idea, you would have to believe that.
You know, there's a lot that actually goes into that. Okay. I mean, first of all, it sounds like one of those trick questions that an atheist will ask a believer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can God kill himself? Because if he's God, he can do anything. Or they'll say, can God make a rock so big that he himself can't lift it? You know, and
Right.
The problem with stupid questions like that is that there are certain words, and every word has a specific definition. There are certain concepts, and every concept has a certain idea definition behind it.
Right.
Okay, so asking if God can create a rock so big that God himself can't lift it is like, because by definition, there is no rock that God cannot lift or raise up. It's exactly the same thing as saying, by definition, it's no different than saying, can God make a two-sided triangle? Well, by definition, a triangle has three sides. That's what the word means. By definition, God cannot. God can do anything by definition. Therefore, God could lift everything. And saying, can God make a rock that he can't lift is like saying, can God make a two-sided triangle? It's creating the image of something that by definition cannot exist, and then saying, can God lift it? It's nonsense.
Right.
So saying, can God, kill himself? Can God commit suicide? Is the same basic thing. If God can't die, of course, you know that leads to another discussion.
Mm-hmm.
If God cannot die, and Christianity says that there has to be a blood sacrifice for the forgiveness of sin, then you have to ask the question: who or what did the dying?
Who died on the cross?
Who died on the cross? If it was Jesus the God. Okay, well, there's a problem with that because by definition, God can't die. Or my God can't die. Sorry about theirs.
Mm-hmm.
All right, which means that the only entity that did the dying on the cross was Jesus the human.
Right.
Well, that means the basis of Christian faith is human sacrifice, which in Deuteronomy, God calls an abomination. And God calls human sacrifice something he hates.
Yep.
Christians are all about love this. Right. God is love this.
It's not funny, but it's very coincidental that pretty much every topic we discuss always gets brought back to the same baseline.
Of course.
No matter what angle we approach these things from,
right.
It always winds up going right back to that same
that's why.
Postulate, the same postulate that, the core foundation of the New Testament is based on something that is
unbiblical,
not backed by the Torah, right? And I mean, we've even
not backed by the Torah, but contradicts the Torah.
Right, exactly.
Numbers 23:19,
I think the word,
if God were a man, it'd be a liar. So
right.
If it's Jesus the man on the cross, then if God was a man, it'd be a liar, and Jesus was God, then God becoming a man becomes a liar. Because all men lie, he'd be like all other men, he'd be a liar too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think the best word to describe it would be contrapositive. Like they are so opposed, the Torah and the New Testament, they're actually contrapositive, which in mathematics means that, A plus B in a certain situation cannot be the same as B plus or B times A, or you know what I mean? Like certain things just cannot work.
Right, because by definition, by the way we have set up the meaning that is associated with a specific word or a specific concept, God, by definition of what we mean by the word God, can't die.
Right.
So it's got to be Jesus the human who died on the cross, and that contradicts what the Bible says. So, Jesus died for your sin. Deuteronomy 24:16. It's not talking about Trinity. It's talking about a human being dying for the sins of someone else, of another person's sins.
Right. And I was recently just listening to a lecture on, really the point of each section of Tanakh. You know what I mean? You have the Torah. This is transmitted directly to Moses. This is, once it's sealed, that's what you are now commanded to live by, right?
Yep.
Everything else is just there to reinforce that message. Nothing is meant to contradict it or change it. Or, prophecy after Moses, it wasn't there to do that.
Right.
It was just there to reinforce the message.
Exactly. So the idea of God killing himself is no different than, could God make a three-sided square?
Right.
Could God make a two-sided triangle? Could God make a one-sided coin? It's asking God to create something by definition cannot exist. So it's an inherently flawed question. But that's the kind of thing we get from atheists. Well, could your God make a rock so heavy you can't? Come on. That's what they do. That's what they do. By definition, can't happen.
Right.
So, yeah. So God cannot commit suicide because God, by definition, can't die.
Right.
So Jesus died on the cross. He's not God.
Right.
Oops.
I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we're going to talk about another paradox.
Yep.
Okay. So in Leviticus 21, says that any man among Aaron the Kohen's offspring who has defect shall not draw near to offer up the Lord's fire offerings. There is a defect in him, he shall not draw near to offer up his God's food.
Right.
And throughout Leviticus 21, we see that, bread offerings, whatever offering, is called God's food, the bread of God. Even animal offerings, when they're burnt, the smell is a delight to God, right? Does that mean that God eats himself? God smells himself? Smells himself burning?
Right. Well, they say, God couldn't just forgive people. He had to turn himself into a human being by making a human woman pregnant with himself. So, and then he grows up and becomes an offering of himself to himself as a sacrifice for other people's sins, because God can't just simply forgive.
Right.
And if that all makes sense to you, you're going to have to explain it to me, because that just never made sense to me at all. By the way, there's another aspect of this. Okay. First of all, it'd be a food, but Leviticus 21:21 that you've got here. Okay. Let's say that he offered himself. Wait a minute. He had a defect. He was beaten.
Yeah. Right.
What kind of, he wore a crown of thorns, and every single picture I've ever seen Christians paint of a Jesus on the cross with a crown of thorns has blood, coming off of the thorns. So he had defects. He couldn't have been
He supposedly replaced the Aaronic priesthood, right?
Right.
And this whole context of this is saying when they cannot come in and eat of the sacrifices, God's food. So if Jesus replaced them and he was defective,
then he cannot.
He couldn't have eaten the Last Supper. He couldn't have made the offer. He couldn't have done any of the offering. He couldn't have done any of it. Right.
Yep. One more example of their convoluted theology. All right,
I don't know if you
so
saw the real quick. I don't know if you saw the video a friend of mine. I let him post it on my channel the other day. I don't know if you saw this.
what
He had
was
a
it of?
he had a the title was God does not poop. All right, are you ready for this? He said he had like a crazy aha moment during one of our videos. You had said about if your God poops, then he's not a God I can worship. And it brought his mind back to the verse in Deuteronomy where it says, if you have to relieve yourself, take it out of the camp and bury it, because the presence of God won't be around that. You know, that's a disgusting thing to him, and he doesn't want to be around it. And he was like, does that mean that God became a baby and sat in his own poop in his diaper? You know, that doesn't even compute. Like,
You know that there's a great scene, for whatever you may think of him, there's a great scene in a Woody Allen movie where he's with his girlfriend and they're at a venue, and they came to see a man from India, a Swami or whatever, and the girl says to Woody Allen's character, you know, some people think he's a god. And at that moment, the camera shows him ducking into the men's bathroom. And Woody Allen says of this God, well, your God just went to go to the bathroom. Like, how can a God go to the bathroom?
right, and that's
And I
that's
think
how
that was
Elijah mocks the prophets of Baal. He's like,
absolutely. Maybe they're
maybe
turned
Baal's off.
aside. That means that's
Yeah,
the euphemism for going to the bathroom.
right.
Right. So,
So to say that Jesus was born and sat in a poopy diaper, that's something my God can't do. I'm sorry. So
yeah, the image is kind of demeaning.
yeah,
Right. All right. So, another element that we wanted to discuss today was if God can't commit suicide, did Jesus go willingly to the crucifixion?
right. And that's a paradox in itself. If God can't commit suicide, then who went to go to the cross, right? So
Right. And who died on the cross? But
yeah,
how could it be willing? Because you have in Matthew 26 two places where it specifically states that Jesus did not want to do this.
mm-hmm.
So Matthew 26:39, and he went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." That means, first of all, how could they be one and the same? God the Father and God the Son. How can they be the same if their will wasn't even the same?
Right.
Okay, there are plenty of other places where it shows that their strength is not the same, their knowledge is not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but here, their will is not the same. Okay, nevertheless, not my will, but your will. And he comes unto the disciples, finds them asleep, and says to Peter, "What, couldn't you watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Is he referring to the disciples, or is he referring to himself? He went away again the second time and prayed the same thing. "O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, your will be done."
Mm-hmm.
Once again, he's saying, I don't want to do this. Okay? And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and he left them and went away again, prayed the third time, saying the same words. So if it's exactly the same words, 3 times he's indicating, hey God the Father, my will is not your will. I don't want to do this. But if I have to, I guess I will, because I got no other choice. So how could that possibly be something that is according to his own will?
And I have a quick question.
Yes.
In 41, if he is talking about himself, he says, the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. I thought all humans were given an neshama, a divine spark from God.
Yep.
So why is it only he gets the Spirit of God inside him?
I don't know. And if he's got the Spirit of God no differently than you and I, what makes him so special?
Right. Why did he even need to be born of a virgin?
Right. And they'll say, oh, well, the Spirit was God, but the flesh is his humanity, his humanness. Okay. I didn't know you could distinguish that much. I have a minister, a friend of mine, who actually uses this phrasing. He actually says that God put on a coat of flesh, a coat of skin, and became a human like you and me. Well, you know what that means? That means the crucifixion, he just took his jacket off.
Right. And here's the thing, even if that is the case, isn't our soul, our neshama, that's like our essence, that's our conscience, that's what drives us along.
And comes from God.
Right. How could we be? I mean, I don't I don't sit in my room and talk to myself and have an argument with myself because my soul wants to do one thing and my conscience, my humanity, my mind wants to do something else.
Yeah, how can you distinguish between the two?
Like my body doesn't take control by itself and my soul has to tell it to stop.
Right. No, your mind has to take control of the body.
Right.
Right. I may want that second or third chocolate milkshake, okay, after the first one isn't enough. I may want the second one, but my mind takes over and says to my body, wrong, not healthy. You know, it's more than enough that you had one, but you're not going to have two. Your mind can oversee your body's wants. That's the whole point of the high holidays for the Jewish community. Fasting.
Right.
Leviticus 23, to afflict yourselves on the Day of Atonement. To show that the single greatest urge we have is to sustain ourselves, to eat. So if we can control that one thing on one day, we can control all the urges the rest of the year. But how do we control it? Mind over matter, mind over, body. So.
Right. But even though we are infused with that spark of the divine, it doesn't make us schizophrenic.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's well put. All right, go to the next one from Mark. Okay.
Yep.
Mark 15:34. Jesus is on the cross. Okay, and according to Mark, his last words were, and at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, carefully take a look. It's Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. This has to be Aramaic. First of all, sorry?
I was saying it's Aramaic. Yep.
Right. First of all, Eloi is how you say my God in Aramaic, not in Hebrew.
Hebrew would be Eli.
Right. Which you have in Matthew.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Mark and Matthew can't decide if he was speaking Aramaic or speaking Hebrew. Okay. But this clearly is Aramaic. And if you're going to translate whatever this says as, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is required to be Aramaic. Why? Because the Hebrew of Psalm 22 or 2, I always get them mixed up. The Hebrew of it says, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani, not sabachthani. Matthew, by the way, has this as Hebrew, Eli, Eli, not Eloi, Eloi, and then says lama sabachthani. Sabachthani, if it's Hebrew, I mean, is Jesus mixing up his languages because he's on the cross and in pain, I guess? I don't know. But Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani is Hebrew, and it means, why have you entrapped me? Okay, but here it's Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is in fact Aramaic, which in fact does translate as, my God, why have you forsaken me? But the point for our discussion is, if Jesus is God, how can God forsake himself?
Right.
And if Jesus feels forsaken, does that mean he really wanted to go through with this?
Right.
And if he didn't really want to go through with this, he's not committing suicide. One more time, you have to go, what? Huh? Regarding Christian theology.
And one more point on this topic.
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes says that when we die, right, our body goes to the ground, returns to the dust, and the
soul from where it came,
and the soul goes back to God who gave it.
Right.
And when Jesus, died, it says he gave up the ghost. So how was his death any different than any other human?
Right. And by the way, according to Luke and John, right before he gave up the ghost, Luke has one thing, Matthew has another thing for what his last words were. To give up the ghost means to die.
Right.
Right before he died, he said something, and then he gave up the ghost. In one, it's it is finished. And in the other one, it's Father, into your hands I commend my spirit.
But what I'm saying,
both be the last words of Jesus.
right?
Be that as it may, the point is that he did not have the same will as the Father,
Right.
and he didn't really want to be crucified.
Mm-hmm.
But he went through with it because, Rome, more power than he had, obviously. And
but if the spirit inside of God, inside of Jesus, was completely God, as the New Testament Christians propose, why would it have to return to God?
And if he gets reincarnated back into his body so he can be resurrected on Sunday, all he gave up was a weekend.
Right.
He didn't really, what happened? Friday he dies, Sunday he comes back. Okay. Mm-hmm. And where was he? Was God no longer God if the spirit, and responding to this friend of mine who's a minister who talks about, God became Jesus by putting on his coat.
The skin coat.
Yeah, it means for a couple of days he took his jacket off, like I said earlier.
Yeah, crazy.
Yep. Makes you SMH, makes you shake my head, makes me shake my head.
Definitely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's the entire thing is just completely paradoxical.
That's the word which you said in the beginning. It is a paradox. Okay. Don't know what else to say on the topic.
Yeah. I think we got pretty straight to the point on that one, huh?
Yeah. Not a whole lot else to say.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it speaks for itself. It's just a matter of I was actually speaking about this similar topic with another friend of mine.
Yep.
And his response was, when they were, he calls them the funny pages. He said when they were compiling the funny pages, they were banking on their parishioners being illiterate and keeping them illiterate. That none of this would ever be sought out. Right. Just a matter, if you have the volition to dig a little bit, it all just falls apart. It's like Swiss cheese. There's holes in it everywhere,
Everywhere the Jews went, when they get kicked out of one Christian country and had to flee to another country, the first thing that they did when they got to the new country was learn the local language.
Right.
But they spelled it, they printed it, they wrote it, because the Jews everywhere we've gone have always been the most literate.
Mm-hmm.
But they would spell it in a language they knew, which is Hebrew characters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when they got forced out of one country and made their way to Germany, they wrote German with Hebrew characters, which is what Yiddish is.
Yeah, right.
Right. But everywhere we've gone, we've always been the most literate. I don't know if you know this, but Daniel Boone, you know what language his financial records were kept in? Yiddish.
Really?
Yes, because his CPA, back then, whatever they called them, his bookkeepers were Jews.
Wow.
And they wrote it all out in Yiddish.
Wow.
Right. Yep. So.
Well, we see even the Abarbanel was basically the finance minister of monarchical Spain back in the 1400s.
Right. They always say, well, the equation of Jews and money and Jews being cheap and Jews, all this other anti-Semitic stuff is because the Jews were the moneylenders. And that's what created the anti-Semitism. Wrong. Exactly the opposite. They already hated the Jews, so they gave them the jobs that nobody else wanted, and that would create even more hate for the Jews. They forced the Jews out of their anti-Semitism to be the moneylenders.
Exactly.
Not the moneylenders led to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism made them become the moneylenders.
Right.
Yep.
And also, I mean, in 1400s Spain, how many Spaniards do you think were all that literate? Do you know what I mean?
And this brings up another issue, by the way. The reason why Christian artwork, sculptures, paintings, drawings, are all over churches is because they couldn't read, but they could understand the entire story of their Jesus in the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
You see a piece of art, it tells you about the story of Jesus. They couldn't read it, but they could understand it from pictures and paintings and sculptures and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yep. All right. That's all.
But all right, everybody.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Rabbi Stuart Federow, author of Judaism and Christianity: A Contrast.
Yes.
Available in English and Spanish. They're both linked in the description of this video.
Go to the link. Go to the link.
Go to the link.
Go to the link.
But all right, everyone. Till next time, I'm Steve Eisenhower, Rabbi Stuart Federow, and we'll see you on the other side, guys.